Sorry, it's been a while, but now we are on to chapter 11, which is titled The Secret Weapon. What's he doing? He's got something on his pushcarts. The Secret Weapon. Carlos was known to the pushcart peddlers as the most skillful carton flattener in the Lower East Side section of New York City. Carlos's business was to go around to small stores that had clean cardboard cartons which they wished to be rid of. With 2 or 3 deft motions, Carlos would quickly flatten the cartons and carefully stack them onto his pushcart. Carlos was the only flattener in the business who could stack to a height of 12 feet without the carton slipping off. 12 feet. That's like 2 tall people tall. When he had a load, Carlos would deliver the cartons to another small business that needed a few cartons. This was a very practical business, as Carlos did not have to pay out any money for the goods he sold. The shopkeepers were glad to be rid of their cartons, and Carlos's only expense was for his pushcart. One reason Carlos never said much was that he spoke only Spanish, except to give the price for a load of cartons. That he could do in English. He could also follow the main idea of a conversation in English, but to reply to a complicated matter, he preferred to speak in Spanish. Carlos's idea at the meeting at Maxine Hammerman's was too complicated for him to try and explain in English. Maxine Hammerman had to explain it for him. Maxine Hammerman spoke Spanish along with 12 other languages. He had to, being the pushcart king, communicate with everyone. Carlos wishes to say, Maxie Hammerman began, that the problem is to make people see who is blocking the streets. Certainly, said Harry the hot dog, but how? Well, Carlos has described to me a very clever pea shooter that his youngest boy had made. Oh, sorry, kitty's getting away. Not in the way. Carlos has described to me a very clever pea shooter that his youngest boy has made, said Maxie Hammerman. Carlos says that the pea shooter shoots not just ordinary peas, but peas with a pin stuck in them. Children, said Papa Peretz, you have to watch them every minute. For example, my grandson. Wait, Papa Peretz, said Maxie Hammerman. We are not yet to the point. The point is that Carlos has told his boy that he must never use such a pea shooter to shoot at people, as it would not be so nice to put a pin in somebody's arm. That's exactly what I mean, said Papa Peretz. Wait, I'm not to the point yet, said Maxie Hammerman. Now Carlos's little boy replies, then what good is a shooter? Carlos does not know how to answer, and he feels bad because the shooter is very cleverly made, and it is a shame for the boy to not use it at all. Then suddenly, said Maxie Hammerman, when Papa Peretz says at the meeting that we need a secret weapon, Carlos is happy. Carlos sees what the shooter is good for. To put pins in the truck drivers, said Harry the hot dog. Carlos shook his head. No, Maxie Hammerman explained. It is Carlos's belief that even truck drivers are people too. He has told his little boy that he must never shoot at people, and he does not wish to set a bad example. Well, then, what is the good of the pea shooter? Said Frank the Flower. Carlos spoke very excitedly to Maxine Hammerman in Spanish. Aha, said Maxie Hammerman. Carlos says we will not, of course, shoot at the truck drivers. They are not the problem. What we will shoot at is the truck tires. He says we will kill the truck tires. Bang, said Carlos, pointing at an imaginary truck tire. Bang, bang. It was a word he had learned from his little boy. Then, Goma Vacia, Carlos said. Goma Vacia, Maxie explained, meant in Spanish, flat tire. Si, Carlos nodded, blowing his breath out and sinking to the floor as if he were a truck tire going flat. Morris the florist took off his hat. Such an idea, he said. For such an idea, Carlos should be president of the USA. President, said Papa Peretz. How can the president speak Spanish? Never mind president, said Harry the hot dog. It's a good idea. Good, said General Anna. It is better than good. It is beautiful. I see the picture. The question is, who is blocking the traffic? All right. We kill the truck tires, and suddenly, everywhere in the streets, big, dead trucks. They cannot move. They are blocking everything. And people look around, and on every block, they see 6, 7, 8 dead trucks. And people will see who is blocking the traffic. We have tried and tried to tell people, but it would be more effective if they see it. Of course, said Mr. Jerusalem. It is not such a nice thing to do. Not nice, said Morris the florist, compared to smashing a man's cart so badly that it can never be fixed. Compared to that, this is a very nice thing to do. No matter how nice, said Eddie Morony, we should not let the truck drivers see us doing it. There could be a difference of opinion. Naturally, said Papa Peretz. It should be a surprise attack. We will keep the pea shooters in our pockets. We will wait until the truck driver looks the other way, and then, quick. And then we look the other way. Just so, said General Anna. It should look like an accidental flat tire. And all of the sudden there will be so many accidents, pondered Harry the hot dog. Yes, said Maxine Hammerman, figuring out on a piece of paper. Let's see. If there are 509 pushcarts, and every man who has a pushcart, and every lady, said General Anna, and every lady, said Maxie Hammerman, if every pushcart peddler kills only 6 tires a day, that would be quite a few accidents. I am all for accidents, said Frank the Flower, but where can we get 509 pea shooters? Oh, we will make them in my shop, said Maxie Hammerman. Carlos's boy can teach us how. Can we also make peas? Asked Papa Peretz. Silly. Peas we can grow, said Eddie Morney. I have a window box, and already I grow onions and beans good enough to eat. Good for you, Eddie Morney, said General Anna. But I am not going to wait around for peas to grow in your window box, much less to dry out. No, we must attack at once. Well, we can buy peas, said Harry the hot dog. Yes, said Maxie Hammerman. I will order 1 ton of peas in the morning. And 1 ton of pins, said General Anna. A ton, said Mr. Jerusalem. But how much will so many pins cost? Every scrap metal junk by the ton? It adds up. I should know. Scrap metal is my line of work. And 1 ton of new high-quality pins? Well, who could afford? Not to mention 1 ton of peas, also an expense. Pin money we will need, Maxie Hammerman agreed. And I will get it. From where? Asked Papa Peretz. I know a lady, said Maxie Hammerman. She can afford to buy a few pins. A few? Said Mr. Jerusalem. 1 ton is a few? Who is the lady? Asked General Anna. By the name of Wenda Gambling, said Maxie Hammerman. Oh, from the movies? Said Harry the hot dog. You would ask her? Why not? Said Maxie Hammerman. In my line, I have to know a lot of people. Should I be the pushcart king for nothing? And you're sure this lady will give you the money for the pins? Said Mr. Jerusalem. I am confident, said Maxie Hammerman, tossing his hammer in the air. I, myself, he said, clutching the hammer before it hit the ground, heard her say that there were too many trucks. Maxie Hammerman was right about Wenda Gambling. She meant it when she said that about the trucks, and she was very glad to buy a ton of pins and a ton of peas as well. In fact, not only that, but she gave Maxie Hammerman 500 autographed pictures of herself for the pushcart peddlers to paste on their carts if they wanted to, and most of them did. Even General Anna, who didn't think much of her movies, took one. Never mind the movies, said General Anna, but the pins I appreciate. Chapter 12. Got another picture coming. Looks like a giant spool of thread. Chapter 12. The Pea Shooter Campaign, Phase 1. It took a week for the pushcart peddlers to prepare for their attack. Maxie Hammerman kept his shop open 24 hours a day, and the peddlers, in teams of 20 men, took turns putting pins inside the peas. Carlos made all 509 shooters himself, with the help of his son. He cut them from a roll. Excuse me. He cut them from a giant roll of yellow plastic tubing that the storekeeper had given him in return for taking away his cartons for 10 years at no charge. It's interesting. At last, everything was ready. The attack was set for the morning of March the 23rd. The evening before, the peddlers all reported to Maxie Hammerman's shop to collect their shooters and 24 rounds of ammunition each. General Anna outlined the plan for the battle. Everyone was to go to the location where they normally did business. He was to wait there until 10 a.m., when the morning traffic would be well underway. And at 10 sharp, he was to fire at the tires of any trucks that came within range. Frank the Flower had wanted Wanda Gambling to fire the opening shot for them in the front, right in front of the Empire State Building, but General Anna felt that this might attract too much attention. Where there is a movie star, said General Anna, there is a crowd, and we do not want the trucks to know what is hitting them. And so, the pea shooter campaign began in quite an ordinary way. Between 10:05 a.m. and 10:10 a.m. on March 23rd, 97 truck drivers in different parts of the city suddenly discovered they had flat tires. Not one of the drivers had any idea what had hit him, for the peas and the pins were so small. 97 hits out of 500 pea pins that were fired in this opening attack is, according to the Amateur Weapons Association, quite a very good average, especially as many of the peddlers had never handled a pea shooter before in their life. And there were a few, like Mr. Jerusalem, who had grave doubts about this whole idea. Mr. Jerusalem's heart was not in the attack. Although he had voted, along with the other peddlers, to fight the trucks, fighting of any sort just went against his nature. Mr. Jerusalem's performance on that first morning of the pea shooter campaign is of special interest. At the time of the Pushcart War, Mr. Jerusalem was already an old man. No one knew exactly how old. He was held in great respect by the other pushcart peddlers because his cart was not only his business, but it was also his home. Unlike the other peddlers, Mr. Jerusalem did not have a room where he went to sleep or to cook his meals. Instead, he had a small frying pan, a cup, and a tin plate, which he hung neatly along the underside of his cart. He had a small charcoal burner built into one corner of the cart so that he could cook for himself whenever he needed a hot meal. Mr. Jerusalem's favorite joke was, Some people go out to dinner on special occasions, but I eat out all the time." And this was true. Mr. Jerusalem was often to be seen sitting on the curb eating a plate of beans or turnips that he had cooked himself. At night, Mr. Jerusalem dropped canvas sheets over the sides of his cart so that there was a sort of a tent underneath it. Then he would park the cart under a tree or in a vacant lot and crawl under it, roll up in a quilt, and go to sleep. In the summer, he often didn't even bother with the canvas sheets. If it didn't look like rain, he slept alongside the cart so that he could see the stars. He was usually the first peddler on the streets in the morning. Mr. Jerusalem had lived this way for 50 or 60 years, and he had never picked a fight with anyone in his life. His motto was, "I live the way I want, you don't bother me, and I won't bother you." Having lived by this motto for so long, Mr. Jerusalem was not quite so happy about the pea shooter campaign. To be sure, he had a great deal more at stake than a lot of the other peddlers. In his case, as we said, it's not only his business, it was his home that was in danger as long as those trucks continued to attack the pushcarts. But still, it went against his deepest convictions to cause any other man trouble. "Are there not enough troubles in the world?" he had asked. And this is Mr. Jerusalem's pushcart. See if it gets in focus. Let's see him sleeping underneath. Were there not enough troubles in the world, he had asked himself, as he had worked alongside the other peddlers, putting those pins in the peas? Why should I make more? Mr. Jerusalem was still asking himself this question as he set off down Delancey Street on the morning of March 23rd, and like the other peddlers, Mr. Jerusalem was fully armed, although no one walking down the street would have noticed. Anyone glancing at Mr. Jerusalem would have taken the yellow plastic straw that was sticking out of his coat pocket and thought it was a yellow pencil or something else. No one would have taken any notice at all at the 24 peas with a pin stuck carefully through the center of each, which Mr. Jerusalem had pinned to the sleeve of his jacket. Or even if somebody had noticed, he would have supposed that Mr. Jerusalem had 24 tiny sleeve buttons on his jacket. Mr. Jerusalem's clothes had never looked like anyone else's anyway. He picked them up from here and there, all second-hand. He had his own style of wearing them. "A sleeve of ammunition," Mr. Jerusalem muttered to himself as he set off on the morning of March 23rd to pick up a second-hand popcorn machine that he had arranged to buy. Who would believe it? A man any age going to war. Mr. Jerusalem shook his head sadly. "I can hardly believe it myself." "Fighting in the streets," he continued. "A man of peace for 80 years is walking fully armed down Delancey Street. A man who does not even care for fighting. And it is not only that I do not care for fighting," he went on. "Naturally, I do not care for fighting," he admitted. "But it is also that fighting a 10-ton truck with a pea shooter sounds a little crazy. I just don't think it will work. But what else can I do?" he asked himself. And as he could not think of anything else, he said, "So I will fight, if I have to." All the same, Mr. Jerusalem was relieved when at 10 o'clock, the hour the attack was to begin, there wasn't a truck in sight, not one parked within 100 feet of his cart. Mr. Jerusalem did not think he could hit the tire of a moving truck. Would General Anna want me to waste this ammunition? He asked himself. Or Maxie Hammerman, or Miss Wenda Gambling, who has been so kind as to pay for 1 ton of pins, not to mention all the peas. When Mr. Jerusalem arrived at the candy store, where he was to pick up the popcorn machine, he parked his cart. He was just starting into the store when someone shouted at him. Mr. Jerusalem looked around and saw Leaping Lima. The driver of the Leaping Lima was trying to back into the space right in front of Mr. Jerusalem's cart. The truck was loaded with new glass and chrome popcorn machines. Now, if there was any kind of truck that Mr. Jerusalem did not like, it was a Leaping Lima. The reason for this was that Mr. Jerusalem had known Louis Livergreen's father, the owner of Leaping Lima. Louis's father had been, before his death, one of the most respected pushcart peddlers in the second-hand clothesline. Mr. Jerusalem had often made a cup of tea on his charcoal burner for Solomon Livergreen when he and Solomon were working on the same street. Mr. Jerusalem should have been glad that Solomon's son was a big success. People like Louis Livergreen now owned 100 big trucks. But Mr. Jerusalem held it against Louis Livergreen that from the day Louis had got his first truck, he had never once come to see his father again. So every time Mr. Jerusalem saw a Leaping Lima on the streets, he thought, they are breaking up family life. As he watched this Leaping Lima back into the curb on the first day of the pea shooter campaign, Mr. Jerusalem wondered what his old friend Solomon Livergreen would have thought of the Pushcart War. Would Solomon, he wondered, have shot at a truck belonging to his own son, Louis Livergreen? What would Solomon had wished for his old friend Mr. Jerusalem to do? Shoot if you have to, he decided. That is what Solomon Livergreen would say. Mr. Jerusalem said to himself. Mr. Jerusalem's conversation with Solomon Livergreen was interrupted by the driver of the Leaping Lima. "Hey, bud," shouted the driver, "stop talking to yourself and move that baby buggy." This driver was Little Milty, a driver mentioned in the diary of Joey Cathlis. Mr. Jerusalem frowned. It was bad enough that Little Milty, a man 1/2 the age of Mr. Jerusalem and not as tall, should call Mr. Jerusalem Bud, but that Little Milty should call Mr. Jerusalem's cart, which was also his home, baby buggy, was also just unnecessarily rude. However, Mr. Jerusalem answered courteously. "I will only be a minute," he said. "Well, I can't wait a minute," said Little Milty. "I got to deliver a popcorn machine." "Well," said Mr. Jerusalem, "I have to pick up a popcorn machine, and until I pick up this second-hand machine, there will be no room in the store for the new machine which you wish to deliver." And he turned to go about his business. But as Mr. Jerusalem started into the candy store, Little Milty raced and roared his motor. Mr. Jerusalem hesitated. He remembered what had happened to Morris the florist, and he glanced over his shoulder. "I'm backing up, Bud," Little Milty said. Mr. Jerusalem sighed and walked back slowly to move his cart over to the other side of the street. Little Milty grinned. "Yeah, that's right, Buster." Mr. Jerusalem did not reply, but as Little Milty was backing into his place, Mr. Jerusalem had left. But as little Milty was backing into the place that Mr. Jerusalem had left, the old peddler took out his pea shooter. He looked at it doubtfully. A man my age with a pea shooter? He sighed. Such craziness. However, he inserted one of the pea pins, took careful aim, and fired. For a moment, nothing happened. Mr. Jerusalem felt foolish. All right, I admit it, he muttered to himself. We are all crazy. Mr. Jerusalem was about to drop his pea shooter in the gutter when he heard a slight hissing sound, the sound of air escaping from a tire. Or perhaps I'm not so crazy, said Mr. Jerusalem. He put the pea shooter back in his pocket and went to collect the popcorn machine. When he came out of the candy store, one of little Milty's rear tires was completely flat. Little Milty was stamping up and down in the street and speaking even more rudely to the tire as he had just spoken to Mr. Jerusalem. What's the matter? Asked Mr. Jerusalem. The leaping Lima is not leaping so good? Little trouble, perhaps? But little Milty was far too angry to even reply. Believe me, Believe me, Solomon, I had to do it, Mr. Jerusalem said to himself, as if speaking to his old friend Solomon Livergreen. The fact is, Solomon, he continued, as he roped the popcorn machine onto his cart, to cause a little trouble now and then, maybe that's good for a man. But Solomon, he asked as he set off down Delancey Street, who would have thought a man my age would be such a good shot? Naturally, it pays to use high-quality pins, he added. Although Mr. Jerusalem knew where he could get a good price for this second-hand popcorn machine, he was now in no hurry to get there. He paused to look over every truck that had stopped at a traffic light or had pulled up to the curb to make a delivery. Mr. Jerusalem chose his targets very carefully, and to his astonishment, he hit 4 more trucks before he ran out of ammunition. 4 trucks for an old man? It's not bad. At 2:30 in the afternoon, he headed back to Maxie Hammerman's to get more pea pins. He still had not got around to selling his popcorn machine. All right, we'll do chapter 13 next time.